Vicky, how are you?
Good. Barry, there's an agenda and a sign-in sheet if you would like.
Okay, thank you.
Is it continuing or are you? It is.
Vicky, how are you?
Good. Barry, there's an agenda and a sign.
Hey, good. How are you? How are you? Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. Space runs out.
Emily,
Families.
there's an agenda and a sign-in if you guys would like it.
Thank you very much.
No, I don't.
See you later. That's the last one. Yeah, I'll see.
All right, yeah, that's very good. Further crops. Warriors perspective. We're gonna have. That's what people have, because they try about it as well.
Yeah. That's good.
No.
I tell the teacher.
That's because
Yeah.
That's all right. So we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Figure this out.
I'll let you.
That's fair. That went down to us over there. Come on. Go back over.
I'll let you.
I'll set the show. I'll do that.
That's.
I'm not gonna set this
Just.
Hey, how are you? Good.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, we
Yes,
can
sir.
hear you. Can you hear us?
And they were asleep at 7.
Now I can, thank you. Just checking.
In there. Literally, I mean, you see pictures of it and you think that doesn't really happen. The face for macaroni and cheese. I was like, oh my God.
All right, if everybody can find a seat, we'll get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Our first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Yeah, lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, at this time, I'd ask for a moment of silence for prayer or personal reflection. Thank you. All right, I am looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jen. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, motion's carried. Now to communications and commendations. First up, the Model United Nations team won first place at the conference hosted by St. Bonaventure University. Delegates to the conference were Rita Anamulasetti, Tyler Camp, Ruby Shahal, Jack DeRose, Tom DiPatro, Lily Sheena, Connor Valenti, and Alex Bovo. Earning medalist honors were Chance Badlow, Hartley Phipps, and Rose Scordo, receiving superior delegate honors, and Dylan DeRosa receiving an excellent delegate award. Congratulations to all those on all of them on their solid performance. The drama club under advisor Lisa Kranz had approximately 40 district students perform Little Women on the stage behind the scenes and in the orchestra pit of the Olean High School auditorium. Congratulations to staff and students. It was a great performance.
It was an excellent performance. Paul?
Absolutely, yes.
Very much.
It was really
Yeah,
enjoyable.
very nice. We have one other, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time for butchering names. But in our Challenge 24, doing the 24 game and the Challenge 24 competition on the 19th of March, we had 2 students from Washington West go to the final round of competition. That's Adha Rajamanathan and Kavaya Saravanan. Am I close?
Very close.
Okay, congratulations to them.
Also, we'd like to recognize Tom DiPatro, who was a Cattaraugus County Youth Bureau Youth of the Week. I think it was last week.
Yeah.
So congratulations to her. It's an amazing honor. And then you see we've got our communications listed. Next up on the agenda is discussion items. First, we have the budget presentation.
Okay. Mark, can you bring up the document that I provided? So tonight I'm going to briefly go over the property tax report card. Later in the agenda, you will be asked to adopt this. As you know, the state budget came out not too long ago, later than we anticipated. There were very, very minimal changes to the revenue side of the budget. Fortunately, I had predicted that, so there is no change to the budget that I'm presenting to you tonight. So we're going to go over the property tax report card briefly. This is required to be reviewed and submitted to the state. So Tomorrow morning, assuming this budget is approved tonight, I will submit it to the state tomorrow. Just a few things that I wanted to address. As you'll see, our total budget is going up 8.36%, about $3.6 million. One thing that I want to point out is the revenue side, the levy will not increase. So as I presented last time, the tax levy or the amount we're getting from the voters will not be increasing. That's staying at 0%. So while our expenses are increasing significantly, there is no increased amount coming from the taxpayers. So while we see this 8.36% increase, we have to look to at what's going on around us. If you look further down on this report, you'll see inflation for last year was at 4.7%. For the first 2 months of this year, inflation was at 7.68%. So we're building this budget for the next 18 months based on really what's happening right now. So although that 8.36% looks scary, it really shouldn't be surprising. I'll get into a little bit of why that is at 8.36% here in a bit. But one of the things I think that we need to focus on is what is included in this budget and what this budget does for our students. So this is providing educational opportunities and support for our students through improved staffing models. We have support for curriculum and assessments in here. We have increased improvement in technology, the amount of technology as well for our students and staff. We also have new educational models that we're going to be focusing on. And all of this is geared around our students and what our students need. We're doing a lot of improvement in our district, a lot of educational initiatives that are supported in this budget. So that's the most important thing that we need to keep in mind. The administrative team has been working on this budget since November. And I want to thank the Audit and Finance Committee. While we do very brief presentations here, we spend hours at Audit and Finance, talking about the budget and going into a lot more detail. So for anybody who has come to the Audit and Finance Committee meetings, you know, we really dive into it in a lot more depth. So getting back, one additional thing a lot of people have asked about is, you know, we have a lot of federal funds available as well. And while we do, and we have a plan for that, there is also a general fund maintenance of effort that we have to maintain as well. So while the federal stimulus funds are intended for one purpose, we cannot simply pull items out of our budget and use the federal funds for that. We still have to maintain the level of expenditures in our general fund budget as well. So how did we get an 8.36% increase? This is the first year in at least 2 that we have 90% of our employees under settled contracts, which is fantastic. We are seeing an increase in our salaries for next year, about a 4% increase overall for all of our staff. We're also seeing a big increase in insurance, health insurance benefits, as anybody is seeing, you know. For us, it's just shy of $1 million that we're seeing an increase in health insurance and other benefits for employees. Transportation is another big increase. You know, we're looking at a 32% increase for transportation. Anybody who has filled up their vehicle lately, you know, knows that. BOE services, we're also seeing just shy of $900,000 increase there. One thing to keep in mind for BOCES is we also get aid back on that. For the special education portion of that, we do get the excess cost aid back as well. Equipment, we are planning for some equipment purchases for next year as well, just shy of $200,000. And other contractual expenses are about $350,000. So the top line of this property tax report card, while it's very small, very small, you know, that's the expense side of the budget right there. If we move down, you'll see the tax levy is $13,888,098. Again, this is no increase to the taxpayers. The next 3 lines in this document really don't impact us at all. This is basically a portion of our tax cap calculation. And the bottom line there too, I don't want to bore you with the calculations, but I think the big thing that we need to focus on is line I, and again, while you can't see it, I'll tell you, $378,968. That is the amount that we could have raised taxes by under the property tax cap calculation. So this year's calculation, we could have raised taxes with a simple majority of the taxpayers, $378,000. The board obviously was in support of leaving that at 0. As we know, foundation aid will no longer continue to increase after this year. So while we're able to keep that tax levy at 0% this year, I believe we've only raised it once in the past 7 years. I'm not sure we'll be able to maintain that going forward, but we're fortunate enough for this year, we were able to do that again. Projected enrollment, we do anticipate enrollment to decrease again next year as well. And that's, then you see the consumer price index as I indicated at 4.7. In the middle section here, we talk about our fund balance. The adjusted fund balance figures you see there that is a compilation of all of our reserve funds and encumbrances that we have set aside. So those are funds that are already designated for a specific purpose. Our appropriated fund balance is the amount we set aside each year, $600,000 to be used towards the next year's budget. Unrestricted fund balance, that is the percentage we can have by law up to the 4%. We are currently at 4.66% now and estimated to be 4% at the end of the year going into next year. The bottom portion of this document, which is even smaller, there are 3 items on there. These are all of our reserves. There are 3 items that we anticipate using reserve funds for next year, one being the purchase of a new bus. We also anticipate using EBLAR or employee benefit accrued liability reserves and the retirement contribution reserve. So we have those figures built into our budget as revenues. But we do list all of the reserves that we have there. Any questions?
Jenny, can you just remind us of what percentage of the budget is instruction? It's a pretty large percentage.
It is a very large percentage.
I believe it's 71%.
Yes, yeah,
And the next biggest would be capital expenditures. correct?
yes,
For
yeah.
maintaining the funds.
That is correct. That is correct. And we will have additional information out on our website. So we'll have all of the graphs out there. We'll also have the budget notice that will go to each of the households. And we also have newsletter articles coming out soon as well. And that has the nice graphs that I've shared in the past. So all of that information will be in there. If you have any questions, once you review it, by all means, let me know. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Jenny. How, is there any chance we can maintain 0% for the next 2 or 3 years, or obviously inflation's kicking in, expenses are going up? Personally, I don't see it, so I don't want to give anybody sticker shock here, but is it possible we can keep the 0% for another 2 or 3 years?
That will be difficult based on the current contractual obligations that we have. The other big thing in that will be how they calculate the foundation aid going forward, because there's a lot of moving factors in that as well. I can't give you a definite answer. It will be difficult. One thing we are doing is working on our 5-year plan, and that will give us a better idea of where we will, different scenarios of where we have to be to maintain a 0, or what we feel we have to do, with that tax levy to be able to break even. So, I can't give you a definite answer right now, but we are working on different situations there.
I just want to make sure our community members realize that the situation that we are in, along with our current atmosphere of the work.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, like I said, 7.68% inflation for the first 2 months of this year. It depends on that too. Our gas prices, is diesel gonna stay at $5.32 a gallon, or is it gonna go down to $3? All of these factors we'll figure out.
okay, electric buses on the.
Electric buses, yes. So electric buses, as you know, was passed in the state budget. We've got a few years to plan for that. Part of planning for that is the new reserve that we're putting out to the taxpayers next month to increase that capital reserve to $2 million. The average cost of an electric bus is $350,000. So right now we have 6 of our own. We have 5 of Portville's buses as well. You know, it's interesting because they say that we can lease them or finance them for 12 years. And while the motor of a bus, you know, you don't have the oil change and you don't have all that, it's going to be very difficult for the body of a bus in this area to stay good for 12 years. I mean, go look at the weather outside right now. How are we gonna maintain buses for 12 years? That will be difficult.
Yearly code.
Yeah, even so, when you're putting, you know, when you're putting 50,000 miles a year on a bus, that'll be difficult. So we are planning for that, just as everybody else is. It's gonna be difficult to get those supplied for us. It, you know, we'll need, mechanics will need new training. The facilities, everything will have to be changed. That's a huge undertaking.
Jen, this is the new reserve. Are we going to be putting money into it? And if so, how much?
So we will determine that within the next few months. What we'll do at the end of each year is if we have funds left over, we will review our reserve plan and designate funds for those reserves if there is funding left. So we don't build a line item in the budget that says, hey, this year we're putting $200,000 in that reserve. There may be some years where we can put money in it. There may be some years where we can't put money in it.
So it'll be one of the choices. Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
So let's just reiterate that so the public completely understands what they're voting on. It's
Right.
really just the establishment of the reserve. Because we can't just make a reserve. We have to have the voter approval for that reserve to exist. It's like to open that bank account, if you will.
Yep.
And then over time, when there are those reserves at the end of the year, then they can be designated. Every year, we update our reserve plan because it is something that fluctuates with time. With need, we'll be dipping into reserves. That's what they're there for. In fact, with each of them, each reserve has a designated lifespan and designated how it's used and whether or not you have voter approval for using it, or if it's something that's done based on the definition of that reserve. So those are all real good questions. I think it's important for everyone to understand when you see the dollar amount next to the name of the reserve, it does not mean that that much money is going into it. It's establishing the reserve for us to save up to those many dollars in that particular reserve.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And Questar BOCES actually provides a fantastic document that summarizes all of that. I'll share that on our website too.
Yeah.
Because that'll be helpful. It's a real nice summary document.
All right, does anybody have any other questions for Jenny on the budget?
Just a big thank you. Anybody who audit finance and put hours in, and Jenny's put 10 times.
Yeah, for sure.
Really, we've been over these numbers, definitely.
Yes.
Worked out.
Thank you.
All right, next up is a discussion of the DEI work group.
Yes, this is just a brief one because we have, of course, we were on break for 2 weeks. But the DEI work group at their next meeting will be looking in, just delving into the framework itself. So we're using the framework from the state. They'll use the information that came from the presentations that we had at the last meeting, with the overall product coming out of it is the subgroups will get together and recommend goals for the district for next year. So they're moving right along, and every time there's a meeting, we're stepping forward. Just want to also say that some of the policies and things that we're looking at throughout the district through that framework, that work is still happening. It's not as if we're waiting for all those goals to happen. Once we've decided that framework is the basis and foundation for the way we look at DEI, it's happening throughout the district. Any questions?
Thank you for the update.
Welcome.
All right, at this time, we come to the public comment portion of our agenda. So we didn't have anyone sign up ahead of time, but I'm guessing there's probably some people that want to say a few things. So I'm just gonna go over the rules, and when we've got 15 minutes allotted for this,
Mr.
so.
Chair, can I do a point of order there? And I bring this up because the board has made it very clear that they must maintain adherence to their policy and their bylaws. At the last meeting, you arbitrarily chose to ignore those bylaws and change policy again. And yet again, you are here. You are sending a very mixed message as to what the function and accountability of the board is. So I would recommend that before making such a suggestion, that it's something that's then discussed by the board and agreed upon by the board.
Thank you for your input. You know, there is room in that policy for the board president to make adjustments to that. So that's what I'm suggesting that we do at this point, rather than stifle the comments by the community.
Just for the record, it is within his discretion to make that decision.
Are there any objections by the board?
I think you were interrupted in reading our guidelines.
Correct. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and read the guidelines so that everybody has an understanding of what we're about to do here. The public is invited to speak about items on the agenda. The Board of Education has allotted 15 minutes for public comment. Each individual can speak for 3 minutes. The board can vote to increase the 15-minute maximum if it wishes. Comments that involve personalities are not permitted. Comments about the performance or conduct of individual staff members is not permitted. Comments about specific and/or confidential student-related issues are not permitted. Individuals may request to have an item for discussion placed on the agenda. The request should be submitted in writing to the district clerk, Mrs. Irizarry, no later than noon on the Wednesday prior to each meeting. So at this point, I'm gonna open this up for comments. I want to do this in an orderly fashion. I will not tolerate any attacks on persons on the board or on persons in the room or persons that are students or staff members.
I would like to say though, that I actually do agree with our policy. I do understand that you have the ability to change that, but I really do appreciate people following the policy and signing up so that we know they're going to speak. I agree, last meeting I felt was a bit of a brouhaha and I didn't really appreciate that. So I don't want to stifle anybody's comments, but we do have a policy and I am about sticking.
I would agree with that since we just recently went over the policy. However, our agenda does not come out until
I
Friday.
know.
And to have people sign up to speak about items that are on the agenda on Wednesday, when the agenda is not out until Friday, doesn't really make any sense. So I
You
do
always come
think
to the
that,
next
you know,
meeting. You always sign up for the next meeting.
Well, I'll just mention this.
but the item might not be on the agenda at the next meeting. So
People do want to get their points across, and I don't disagree with what has been said, but it is well within your authority. My only question and concern are gotchas.
Yeah.
Not you, but we can open that up to situations and individuals that are here for more political reasons as opposed to the kids. And we are here for the kids.
And we're here to do the business of the board. There's a lot of business that needs to be done, the hours
Touche.
that are spent doing the business of this board.
All right,
It's
so
important to remember that.
yeah, so we have about time for about 5, 6 people, depending on how long each person takes. Do we have interest up there? I see Leo's up there. He would like to speak. Why don't we start there then?
Do you want me to come down or just speak from here?
Yes, we're sticking 3 minutes. Could you come down?
Yeah.
I think it would help the rest of us and the microphone to pick it up. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then I would like name and address
Got
too,
your
please.
timer there, boss?
Where's the microphone?
That's right here.
It's down
So
here.
just anywhere up. front.
Okay, perfect.
It's omnidirectional.
All right, this is it.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. My name's Leo Walters Sahara. I prefer to not state my address for safety reasons. So thank you for allowing us the chance to speak. For the record, I do apologize. I was signed up to speak last time and I was told that I wasn't able to speak because I wouldn't be here. Then I understood that they called my name, so I just want to apologize. I don't want you to think that I was shirking the commitment there. But I want to say thank you for putting forth this policy. I think it's good and sound doctrine that does in fact protect our entire school community in terms of gender expansiveness and inclusivity. I see a sign that says we don't want biological males in our daughters' rooms. That's correct. We don't want males in the women's bathroom. But if I walked into the women's bathroom right now, would I be hassled? Probably. And that's the reality of the situation. Gender non-conforming people and transgender people exist. And as a matter of fact, transgender students are 70% more likely to experience violence than their cisgender components. And if we are worried about men dressing up as women to walk into the women's bathroom, then what we have is a problem with men and not a problem with trans women. I think that this policy is fantastic and it does allow for the faculty and the staff to have discretion. They can see who is and who is not presenting as a certain gender on a certain way. And I think it does give leverage there for faculty to say, you're just pulling our leg. So I would like to thank you guys for this policy. I've read it over and it does seem very conclusive. And I think it's well overdue in terms of protecting those that are most vulnerable among us. As a statistic, 80% of transgender students have had unwanted sexual advances made at them within school grounds in the past year. And I can give you all the surveys related to those, but I believe that was from the Trevor Project. So when we're talking about protecting our students, we are talking about protecting all students, and that doesn't include trans and non-binary people. This is a public school, this is a public place, and it should be safe and accessible for all. So I think this policy in mind is well drafted. It gives the faculty and the staff ability to have leverage and to rein people in who are wanting to cause trouble. But I think it's important that we remember that if once again we're worried about biological males being in the women's bathroom, then our conversation is actually about toxic masculinity and the way that our culture treats men, as opposed to the way that trans women are and actually simply want to go to the bathroom. If we wanted to go to non-binary bathrooms for everyone, that would be amazing, probably cost prohibitive, but I think that this policy is well founded. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lee. Sorry, that was all. Sorry.
Way to go,
Almost
Paul.
close. Good job. Hey, is there anybody else that wanted to make a comment? Tim?
Tim Sherlock, I live at 216 Warden Avenue, temporarily until I move. And I meant no disrespect, please. I hope I didn't come across that way. Again, one of my main factors here in running for the board is making sure that we adhere to the policies, we do what we say, and we say what we mean. I did take a moment after landing this morning and I did look over the policy. I think it's a very good policy and a very good step in the right direction. Some of the things I would like to see come with it, which I know we're doing on the DEI, is better trainings for our teachers and understanding the terminology, understanding what we mean when we say cisgender, gender nonconforming, understanding what those terms are, and how to interact with our students who are transgender and of these other categories. I'm not going to list all of them off. So I'm hoping that this policy, though it is a step in the right direction, will encompass some of that broader education for our teachers to help keep our students safe and our faculty. Let's be honest, we have faculty here. We're a very diverse faculty in our school district who are part of the LGBTQ+ spectrum. So that was mainly all I wanted to speak about, was just looking at the policies we do put in place and again, making sure that they are in line with legislative pieces that we are looking at coming out currently. Thanks.
Thank you. Rob, I saw your hand go up.
Yep.
Rob Fazio, 457 Indiana Avenue, Olean. I'm looking at the agenda. Everything has been read except for two, A, B, C, D. Just wondering why these people are put on the agenda. If this is going to be a typical thing that happens every time there's communication to the board, or some kind of explanation for it. I read on here that you can't speak about personnel, things like that. You have district staff members on here with, looks like some pretty personal issues with the school district. And it's pretty astonishing and I think inappropriate. And honestly, from what I've seen, it's difficult.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Hi, my name is Teresa Lynch. I'm at 116 South 17th Street here in Olean. I have two female daughters in the school district, and I'm very concerned about the new transgender policy that you guys are trying to implement. I understand that we need to be versatile, that we need to offer all these different options, but who is protecting the children that are not transgender? These kids, I mean, think about the trauma, the people that do not believe in that. We've been teaching them since they were little, do not share bathrooms with boys, do not share bathrooms, you know, we all stick to one thing. And then all of a sudden we're changing, you know, lifestyle and the way things work. And so imagine a little girl in a bathroom, in a locker room, undressed, you know, going to the bathroom, all of a sudden you have a boy come in, okay? They have different parts. So is anybody thinking about protecting the kids that are not transgender? I mean, we are talking about body parts that are different, and that's clear. And there should be no reason that we need to do this. If you guys want to set up a policy like this, make it individual bathrooms. Everybody gets a private bathroom.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
If you don't mind, I'll stand here. I have very bad knees, so getting up and down. My name is Vicki Lowestoft, 153 North 7th Street.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear your last name.
Lowestoft.
Ma'am, the microphone's down here, that's
She's
fine.
making, I have a very bad knee. The point is, I stand in agreement with what was just said. As far as transgender, we're considering their rights. What about our rights? If we were raised pseudo-Christian from birth, God says there's man and there's woman. He created it, not us. You all want to abide by transgender. My question is, why not have a bathroom transgender? In other words, the girls are no longer going to have to be worried about seeing parts that they've not been talked to about or exposed. Maybe there's been trauma at home or some other type of lifestyle that would definitely traumatize them further. Or boys, why not have a separate bathroom for transgender people? That way, they're not having to be exposed to things that they may not want to be harassed about. And you know there's going to be harassment, gymnasiums, showers, clothes changing. Why not have, like you have at the large public facilities, a family bathroom? Of course, it would be family here, but it would be an open, closed door bathroom for people who are in that association of transgender. They're not harassed, our children aren't harassed, they're not shocked. To me, that's the answer. If you insist upon pushing this down our throats, we don't have a separate area in restaurants or airplanes. I'm a nurse. They don't come into the hospital, I'm transgender, I want to be over here. We see everybody. How about separating that section of personnel or people who feel they want to identify with that in a separate facility outside of harassment and
Okay,
religious.
that's fine, thank you.
I'm sorry?
That's your
That's-
time.
All
that's
right,
about
well,
3
thank
minutes.
you for hearing me.
Thank you.
Ma'am, could I have your address?
No, thank you.
Okay, here on out, we need people's addresses regardless.
She's wrong.
All right, that's been about 15 minutes. So we're gonna move on to the next item on the agenda. which is a report by the safety committee. You're gonna take that.
We have the minutes there, just right there.
Oh, that's right, yep, we have the minutes on there, which have been looked over. Does anybody have any questions on the safety committee minutes? All right, then we had a buildings and ground committee. The minutes are on there as well. Anything that needs to be discussed on those minutes?
The only thing I would probably mention as chair is that we discussed our training duty staff. So kudos go out to Janine for lighting a firecracker there. Took me 15 minutes to go online and get something. We got 3 hits. We discussed it in our last meeting. Pretty much everything we do now. Some of it we didn't need because the thing we looked at was 12 years old, probably from another school district. But the information is out there. It is online if anybody wants to do their due diligence, what we don't already have. So we're copying the last one.
No, I think the relevant points are listed in the minutes.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you spending that much time. No, I mean, it's good.
Yeah, there's some good stuff.
Good discussion.
Just fine tune it the next time we have a meeting next week. Let's see it. Oh, we did hire an HVAC individual.
Well, yes, it's on here.
Kudos.
We expect to, it's later in the agenda.
Well,
Do we have a start date for summer project?
Jenny?
For the
The
capital.
capital project?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, once everything is settled tonight, then we will meet with the architects and the construction managers and get a date set, get a timeline set for that. But we anticipate boots on the ground as fast as we can get supplies here and going. Washington West has already planned, as soon as school is done and kids are out, they're packed up and we're hitting the ground running. But we'll have a more specific timeline for you.
Yeah. I see
Most likely
some
next
on the
month.
Yeah, and I think it's worth taking a moment just to recognize that our principals, our elementary principals have spoken to each other, put together a great plan, and what worked over at Eastview, they put into plan for Washington West. And all of our staff at Washington West have been doing an awful lot of planning, packing, sorting. They're preparing and getting ready. We would never be able to get done what we plan to get done in the time frame if we didn't have the cooperation of the staff under the direction and leadership of our principals. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that because so much happens behind the scenes and we're not as good at just recognizing what the good stuff that's happening. That is phenomenal. And, I know there's a lot of planning happening everywhere, but we're packing up and moving entire classrooms and then still planning on how are we working out in the summer and doing some summer programs with kids. So thank you everyone for all your planning.
All right, nothing else for buildings and grounds. Now it comes to the board report. I don't have a lot for the board report. We were out for 2 weeks on break. So there is a Cattaraugus County, Allegheny County BOCES dinner coming up. So I think we have a couple of people that are planning on attending that next week or the week after. It's coming up. I think it's the 28th. That's all I have for the board report. Dr. Nealon for the superintendent's report.
Yeah, a few things. We've been talking a lot about our communications and increasing our communications throughout the district. Today at our administrative council meeting, we met Melissa Biddle. She is our PR representative from BOCES, who's going to be working with us for about the equivalence of 3 days a week. She'll be, when she's here, and a phone where you can call her is down in room 32 of the high school, will be kind of a home base when she's within the district. She's working with 2 other districts. But communications@oleanschools.org is her email address. And so you don't have to worry about remembering who she is and what day she's here. We're asking all of our staff, anyone who is a coach or a classroom teacher who has something coming up that they want to make sure that people know about, or activities that are happening in our schools, to let Melissa Biddle know about that at communications@oleanschools.org. And the other person that we met today at our meeting, was very exciting, was Michael Nelson. Thank you. Michael Nelson is, she's working with us through the Farm to School grant. We'll have her working with us for the next couple of years. That's very exciting to have her with us, talking about some nutrition and putting some programming in place. And then we just learned about some opportunities of even enhancing that grant. And if we qualify, you know, we're going to be all over it. So that's, it's just very exciting. She already has some ideas that she wants to bring to our students within the district to help open up their eyes about nutrition, and also some of the farming that's happening right outside the city limits, just in our own backyard. So that's exciting. Along those lines of excitement, I want to remind everyone of a night at the races on Friday, May 6th. There's that's being advertised all over the place, but what is that all about and why do we care? That is the major fundraiser for our Education Foundation. And our foundation just helps to support so many students and so many programs throughout the district. Whether it's trips, it's enhancing their educational experiences. That's what they stand for, that's what they fund. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that that was coming up, and any support you can give to our foundation is greatly appreciated. The 2022-2023 New York State budget has enacted. We heard a little bit about that, but you'll see, and I'm sure you saw that as well, it was a front to education. And we're very happy to see some of the increases that we worried might not be there. And we also worried what would happen if it wasn't there. For the zero emission school buses and related infrastructure, a couple of things I wanted to highlight. That has to be by no later than July 1st of 2027. Every school district will only purchase or lease those zero emission school buses. One thing they did for us though is the cost relating to the lease, the purchase, the construction, if you think of the parts, the infrastructure, everything that goes into it, that will also be transportation aidable. That was in question before, but in the budget, it was enacted that that can happen. Also, aidable fuel shall include electricity used to charge or hydrogen used to refuel zero emission school buses. That wasn't there to begin with. So to hear about that was a very good thing. We're glad about that. Yes, it's an ambitious schedule that no later than July 1st of 2035, which might sound sci-fi, but we know it's just really right around the corner, that we can only operate and maintain those zero emission school buses. So there's a lot of planning that goes into it too, as far as parts go. We have so many parts that we keep on hand and such. It's the training that goes into it, but it's also identifying what parts will we be able to use afterwards and which ones will we not. So know that those plans have already begun, and I know Jenny's already started the talks with our transportation department. Yes, sir.
Is there any talk of building aid for said buses and newer technologies?
We were happy to hear about transportation aid being used. So right now, our transportation aid at about 90% is pretty favorable for us. Yeah. And with that, it also doesn't have, I mean, we might have less of the red tape going through if we had to have everything going through a building project.
Yeah, I agree. And because for our district, we're oftentimes maxed out on our building aid and what we can finance, it's better off that it goes through transportation aid.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jen,
It's a great question.
we're planning on buying a new bus. Is it electric?
The one we are looking to buy next year is not electric.
So would it be better to leave off since all of our buses in the future are gonna have to be electric?
We discussed that as well. That's a good question. We're gonna proceed with the diesel bus for next year. We have one bus that is beyond its limit, so we have to replace it very soon. Electric buses are very, very difficult to come by right now. The average wait time for an electric bus right now is 14 months in production. So because we need that bus right away, and we have an 8-year replacement plan on our buses, the bus that we purchase in the summer will last us the next 8 years. So we need the bus sooner than what we can get an electric bus available.
Or the infrastructure to pick it up
Correct.
and to run it.
Right, because we
So
don't
we're
have
not there
charging.
yet. That
Right,
has to be in place first.
right.
really,
We don't have
before.
charging stations yet. Our mechanics haven't been trained yet. I'm not sure that bus is gonna get us to Randolph and back yet because there's no charging stations there. So not just the Portville Bus Garage and Olean needs to be ready for that. The entire Western New York and New York State needs to be ready for it. If we take, a group of kids to Odyssey of the Mind in Syracuse, I need to make sure there's a charging station somewhere, because that bus isn't getting to Syracuse and back on the electric that it's charged on.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say, if the state wants us to do this and within a set timetable, they're gonna have to work with the infrastructure within the state itself to allow us those charging stations throughout. So that's kind of a one hand stretches the other.
There was one little caveat they put on there that we can apply for a one-time 24-month extension. And there's a real good chance that we'll be applying for a one-time 24-month extension, just as a safety net, whether we use it or not. That would be my recommendation.
And I think you'll see a lot of things change between now and the time this actually goes in, because the state's gonna have some hiccups that they have to work through as well.
Karen, when is that waiver request due? And
Okay, hold on one second.
because it seems like we don't have to decide that now.
No, we don't have to decide it right now. There's no date on it. So the other thing that, regarding the budget that I wanted to highlight and make sure everyone understood is, we have seen that there's are resignations, there are retirements, that whenever a change happens in staffing, we stop, we look at it on whether or not we're replacing that position. We look at the impact to the program the next year. We look at how we might be able to adjust our schedule. I just want to make sure everyone understands that we look at everything very carefully. We don't just roll it over just because. So when you see that we're hiring another position, there has been some discussion that went behind it. And we're also looking at our purchases and how we're purchasing. We're doing more purchasing where we're leveraging our purchasing power by combining with other school districts to try and get the lowest price that we can. We've also been talking about our utilities infrastructure and what we might be able to do to lower those costs, because they have been our scariest costs as of late. One last thing, April 28th, we are participating in Teacher Recruitment Day, speaking of staffing. And I would just suggest, if we know of anyone who is looking for a position, please visit often our website where we have all of our postings. And any other further information that's needed, please call our Human Resources Department.
Can I ask a quick question? Sure. I know you sent an email earlier about communications.
Yes.
And I do see that, it was mentioned that we're using this communications section now.
Mhm.
How, because we've never really used it in the past. If you did not receive communication from all these people, how do you get that communication?
Make sure your board president knows.
Okay, so it's just, so we're using this to notify board members how much
Yes.
communication has gone to.
So it's an acknowledgement that we've received a communication from an individual. And it's a confirmation that all the board members have seen the communication.
Okay.
And if you haven't seen something on there, just let me know.
Sometimes you don't get an email correct and it gets bounced, and so it's not all of us get, that we're just trying to be more transparent.
Now,
and
if
more
somebody
open
sends you an
and making-
individual email, are we expected to be forwarding those on?
Yes.
I would appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah, a reminder to everyone is that the board acts as a body, not as individuals. And one important thing for a board to be able to do the work well is that everyone is aware of everything. We don't have some people in the dark on something, and other people are knowledgeable. So that's a big part of it. And it's also asking and reiterating with our greater public of utilizing, there is a board email address that if you use, and I think I'm going to say it right, Olean BOE oleanschools.org goes to every board member. And then you don't have to worry, did I remember everyone? Did I spell his or her name correctly? Just use that Olean BOE at oleanschools.org, and it's also on our website. That's a quick and easy way to make sure the communication gets to everyone.
Sorry to interrupt, I just have a quick question regarding that. It does communication work both ways, because I sent an email to the board members yesterday and I received no response back, so I'm just curious.
You can talk about that later. You and I can talk. Okay, one other thing I thought of for the board report was our superintendent search. Our application process has come to a close. I understand we do have applicants, so we will be moving forward with that. There's a meeting next Monday with our search consultants.
We'll see that later on
Oh,
in
sure.
the agenda.
All right.
And that it has been updated with a summary report of all of the surveys that were completed and the focus groups that people participated in. It's all on our website. Thank you very much for getting it up there. I appreciate that. So, yep, it's there. If you look.
All right.
Just keep in mind, I'll have to log out after 9 o'clock. I gotta work. Okay.
All right, so we're moving on to the consent agenda. Looking for a motion to approve. the consent agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Julio. Any discussion?
Just one thing, we're about to circle items and coolers we're gonna get rid of. Are we responsible for taking off the cooling? Yeah.
It depends on how we're getting rid of it. If we're disposing of it, then yes. If we're selling it or giving it away, then no. I don't believe that we're.
I mean, I've seen scrap, so I mean, there's two
Then yes.
different ways of scrap. We're either gonna make money off of this, which ain't gonna be much, or we're gonna show environmentally responsible how we are, and we're not.
And neither of those two are operable anyway.
Right, yeah, we still gotta take care of our.
Correct.
I noticed a error on the minutes of the last meeting. I think it's page 7. There's a vote that said there were 8 ayes, and I believe there were only 7 in attendance. So I respectfully submit that correction.
Here it is.
Thank you, Ira.
Good catch, Ira.
Anything else? So the motion with the correction by Ira, the motion was made by Mary and seconded by Julio.
Yes,
You
that's
want to have
fine.
that correction by Ira?
Yes, we make the correction that there were only 7 ayes.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, moving on. To new business. All right, so the budget is on the agenda for approval by the board. Can I get a motion for that?
So, and I'll second.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Mary, any discussion besides the discussion we've had for months?
That was pretty exciting for a budget. Comment.
Will there be a separate resolution for the new reserve?
It's an item on the vote.
Ira, that was part of the notice of annual meeting resolution that the board adopted.
Thank you, Vicky.
Okay.
Any other discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Next up, we have the real property tax report card, which Jenny has presented to us. Can I get a motion for that?
Sure.
So moved.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ira. Any discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Then we have the school calendar, which we've all had a chance to take a look at. Can I get a motion for that?
Move. Second.
Janine and Jim, thank you. Any discussion on that?
Just my thanks to everyone for their input into this calendar. It was not done in isolation. It was done with an awful lot of input from our staff, and it's reflective of all of their comments and input, and I thank them.
Usually I do get some input as to how we're doing it every year. This year's no different, but I want to point out that each and every district that does make its own calendar. Us being a small city school district, we're a little bit different, and we have a flavor to it. So if school districts get like 1 week off here and another week off here instead of 2 weeks, that's all decided by the people that make these decisions. So.
Ours was done this year very respectfully in conjunction with what our students who are attending BOCES and attending some other out-of-district placements, it will be aligned. So we won't have the situation where we're off and they're on or the other way around. So it's much more lockstep, not every single day, but most of the days. So that will be better for families and students.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think people need to really know that if we just don't
Agree.
make this willy-nilly, and there's a lot of thought that goes into this process, so.
Great.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We have the BOCES budget. Get a motion on that one.
So moved.
Sure.
Thank you.
Defer to Ira.
All right, we'll put Ira down. Any discussion on the BOCES budget?
I always hate voting for this. It's like, you
15
know,
years.
well, it's like 50 years too late to talk about, you know, something that just never changes, right? I mean, we spent this, it's an $88 million budget for BOCES. It's twice Olean School District's budget we spend on BOCES. The taxpayers in this district basically fund two schools. We fund our local school and we fund BOCES. And nobody really thinks about why we're doing that. And 35% of their budget is non-instructional. 35% is, you know, administrative overhead and capital costs. We've just got, I mean, we're a small community and we're pouring money. And, you know, they're cost drivers. For some reason, that's inexplicable to me, their special education costs far exceed hours per student. And we never really get an explanation for that. They really are unaccountable directly to the public in any way. I mean, I just wish something would be some political pressure to rethink why we spend $88 million a year on this.
Comptroller Janine has a nice ring to it.
What can we do about that?
Unfortunately, nothing. But I can complain.
I just kind of
which I
mentioned
do, yeah. It's, I don't know of any other state in the United States that has a situation where they've got this kind of balloon of a program that we all fund in addition to our local schools that just kind of grows out of control. But we are stuck with that reality here in New York, and it's, you know, you ask why our local taxes are going to have to go up. Believe me, that's one of the reasons. That
Anybody
being
else?
said, we don't have much control.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna call the vote for it then. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
You're gonna oppose? Okay. So we got 5-2 on that. All's back. Alden, sorry about that. Alden, want to vote on the BOCES budget? Yea or nay?
Okay. Yes.
All right, now we have the BOCES board election. Can I get a motion for that one?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
Second.
Thank you, Jim. Any discussion on there? we have one candidate.
Just one candidate
Not
for
much
each
discussion
spot.
there.
There's not much to discuss.
That makes our choices a little unfair.
Let's take the vote then.
We have to take the vote individually.
Yeah, correct. I do
Yeah.
too, yes.
All right, so Ralph Kerr, Area 3, vacancy is a 3-year term. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
Don't ask me that question.
Right.
Charles Davis, Area 7. All those in favor?
Sure.
I,
Opposed? Abstentions? Area 8, Rob Van Wicklen, 3-year term. All those in favor?
I,
Opposed? Abstentions? Now we have a school volunteer. It is Jennifer McAndrew for the volleyball or softball coach, modified softball volunteer.
So moved.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Jim. Any discussion?
I do wish they were compensated.
Well, we can always work on it.
All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions?
I know.
We have a budget transfer over $50,000 for the gas bill.
Again?
No, that was election last time.
Oh,
Yeah,
I don't know.
gas this time.
Man,
Thank you, Mary.
sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of budget increases. Any discussion? All those in favor?
I,
Opposed? Abstentions? Then we have a very generous contract for Bradner Stadium. Can I get a motion for that?
so moved. Oh, I'll second.
Janine and Mary. Thank you to the city of Olean for keeping it at the same rate. Appreciate it. All those in favor?
I,
Opposed? Abstentions? The city is stepping up and helping out with the baseball fields, so we can use those. It'd be helpful during our construction project. Can I get a motion for that one?
Sure, second.
I'm gonna go Julio. Jim? Thank you again to the city for that contract. All those in favor?
I,
Opposed? Abstentions? We need to approve Laura Hodera and Maureen DeCervo as lead evaluators.
So moved.
Thank you, Janine.
Second.
oh,
Thank you, Paul. Any discussion?
Dr. Gillen, could you just tell me briefly what a lead evaluator is?
Absolutely. So under our, if you've heard of APPR, that's the Annual Professional Performance Review Plan. Anyone who does any evaluations has to go through a certain amount of training that we have outlined in our plan. And our 2 new administrators have gone through the training and they have been approved by the trainers as ready to go. And we do have to formally approve them so we can also state that they've been approved. It's our recognition of their training and I thank them for going through the training. And their principals thank them too, because now they have a hand.
there's a lot of crowd.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
I,
Opposed? Abstentions? We have some capital project bid awards. See them listed there.
It's always nice to see some local business.
So, can I get a motion?
Sure.
Jim?
Second.
Thank you, Ira. Any discussion?
Yeah, Jenny, how much over budget is this? Estimate?
Yeah, there's about 2.3 million.
Just so everybody knows.
There's about 2.3 million. We predicted this going into it, so we set aside several alternates. If prices go down, if there's any fluctuation, we will reevaluate those alternates before we close out the project. So we may still be able to do things depending on how everything fluctuates between now and the end of the project.
Thank you.
Reminder to everyone, this is the 2019 capital project. So when it was voted on in 2019, life was a little different. But the amount that our voters voted on cannot change. That's the ceiling that we can spend up to. So there was a list of things that we expected to get. What we're saying basically is not everything on that original list will we be able to get. So we were looking at our priorities, and the priorities are not done in a willy-nilly kind of fashion. That's a very technical term. It's done using our building condition survey that's done every 5 years in a school district, which is a very thorough point-by-point inspection of all of our buildings and grounds. And we'll look at those safety things or those infrastructure that requires our attention first as being our highest priority. So we won't get everything we had wished for, but we're doing the best that we can. And I thank our construction management group for their expert advice and leadership in helping us make those decisions and working to get the bids that we got. So thank you. And I'm looking at this gentleman here because Barry does work for campus construction and he has been our helper throughout this whole process so far. So thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, now we have a tax settlement with the Strowman's property. Can I get a motion for that one? Thank you, Janine. Sure. Jim? Any discussion?
Well, it's a little bit of a drop, but it's probably livable, I guess.
We saw quite a few of these come into our emails at the, like,
every
what was
year.
it, September?
Yes, this is one of them that you saw. This is one that has been settled. The other ones are still being negotiated between the attorneys. So this is a lot better than it could have gone.
Now, when we negotiate these, I know they send these same things to the county. Do they end up negotiating the same amount, or does the county sometimes negotiate different amounts also?
No, their assessed value is the assessed value for all taxing municipalities.
So are we working with the county when we?
All the attorneys work together on it, yeah. This is a very, very complex area, so the attorneys do work together on this.
Okay, so it's the
Yeah.
same for the property for everybody.
But it is becoming more of a trend, you know,
It
to
is.
see our businesses negotiate reductions in their assessment. And the levy stays the same, so if the businesses pay less,
Yeah,
homeowners pay more.
who pays more? That's
So
right.
even though you say that we're going out at zero, which we are, it doesn't necessarily mean your taxes aren't gonna go up because other people's taxes are going down because business assessments are going down. So it's a tough bind that we're in. And until we can grow ourselves out of it as a city, it's, that trend is going to continue.
This is one of the larger assessments, I think, in Olean. And,
Yes.
and they are an employer who employs many people. But as Janine mentioned, this is a trend that's been going on for years, since I first got on the board, which was 9 years ago. And it's disturbing in one sense, and we just have to always compensate by hoping that the state is generous with us as they have been this year. But we can't always count on that either.
Right.
And so, in my view, we need to look at possibly other sources of revenue. I mean, I understand the necessity for this, and we want to keep our local businesses, and we don't want to put an undue tax burden on them, but at the same time, our tax base is shrinking, and that's a real concern.
I'm glad you held them off as much as you did, because 450 is just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and honestly, the attorneys
That's
are
the
the
way they
ones that
go.
work hard on this. And it was, yeah.
All right. We can hold out hope too. There's some building projects in the works down in the west end of Olean that I've read about lately.
Yeah.
That'll be more
Absolutely.
businesses on the tax roll.
Absolutely.
All right. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And I am gonna need signatures from everybody in that one. Okay, next up, we need to call a special board meeting next Monday. Can I get a motion for that?
So, and I'll second.
Julio and Mary. And this is for purposes of meeting with our superintendent search consultants. So they're gonna bring us what they found. Any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor?
Thank you, Mary, for all.
Yes, thank you, Mary.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Opposed?
No.
Abstentions? All right, on to personnel. We have got a resignation, Paula Bernstein.
So moved.
Thank you, Ira.
Second.
Thank you, Jim. Any discussion?
Generally, we put with regret. I don't see
Typically
that.
during retirement resignations. we do.
Right, right.
This
Well,
is, we wish her well in her new endeavor, for sure.
She'll be missed.
She will.
yes.
So we wish you well, definitely. Any position.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? We need to increase hours for a food service helper. Hughes?
Move. Second.
Janine snuck in there and Jim. For the second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? We have an appointment for a HVAC specialist, David Marshall.
Ooh, could I do this?
Yeah, you can do this one. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thanks, Paul. This one's been a long time coming.
So,
Just one thing, if we could please put in parentheses new or new position at the end of it, as part of our position control that we've been trying to do. This one slipped through somehow.
Jim, is that good with you?
Yep.
Paul?
We did.
yes.
Yeah. I think it just missed that one.
Yep.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, now we have a tenure area change for Caitlin Martin. Thank you, Jim.
Second.
Thank you, Janine. Any discussion?
What was her tenure area?
But she was in special education.
Okay,
And when we see Karen's name in parentheses, this is taking Karen's place. It was through an internal posting.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Now on to discussion items. We have the second reading of policy 5630, facilities inspection, operation, and maintenance. Can I get a motion to adopt that policy? So moved. Thank you, Paul.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Janine. Any discussion?
I think the next iteration needs to have lead water testing requirement. That was in vogue a couple years ago. I didn't see it in this policy and think we ought to continue to periodically test our water. So the next iteration of this policy.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Now we have policy 5683, fire drills, bomb threats, bus emergency drills. Can I get a motion to adopt this policy? Jim, thank you. Thank you, Janine. Any discussion?
Wish we didn't need it.
Yeah. Better to have it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We have the second reading of policy 5681, the school safety plan. Can I get a motion to adopt this policy?
So moved.
Thank you, Ira.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? We have the second reading for policy 6160, professional growth and staff development. Can I get a motion to adopt this policy? Thank you, Mary.
Second.
Thank you, Janine. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Next, we have policy 6460, staff use of computerized resources. This is the third reading. Can I get a motion to adopt this policy?
So moved.
Thank you, Janine. Second. Thank you, Jim.
Are we ready to adopt this policy?
Any discussion?
There is one edit that we neglected to make on page 2 of 5. Under number 3, to omit where it says or community member, and it should say any other district employee or student, and end right there.
Yeah.
We talked about it, we meant to do it, it didn't happen, so that just is the one last thing.
For some reason, I had thought in the last operations meeting that we were still waiting to hear back from some of the bargaining unit,
We did hear back.
Yeah.
and everything's been,
This was one of those changes that we had forgotten to make that change, and that just came through as they've been looking at it over again.
I moved the adopt policy as with the amendment just.
Thank you, Janine. Jim? Sure. Yeah.
And I do thank the bargaining units and everybody who helped us with this. It's a difficult, very difficult policy and it took a long time and went through a lot of iterations. That's something that we. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we had. For sure.
Right, and it's also not the end.
I just
That's
was
the
gonna
other
say,
thing.
it can be changed, all these policies, we're just, we need to approve, we need to get it approved.
And I think what the committee took away from all of the conversations is the most important part will be how the policy is enacted, especially when it pertains to professional learning around the parts of the policy. Not just so we don't step into it and make mistakes, that we're aware of what we say and how we say it and the effect on the school community.
Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, we got that one out. Or not. Then we have a first reading, policy 1510, regular board meetings and rules.
This is one of those, it's a discussion item. This is one of those policies, I had to make sure I wasn't out of line. One of those policies that we're going back and checking our policy manual, this one needed some updates.
One thing I noticed that I thought might need to be updated is I believe that the policy says that the board agenda will be distributed on Friday. And it doesn't, I mean, I'm not sure we want to commit ourselves to the board agenda being distributed on Friday. I mean, I think that kind of presupposes the board meetings have to be on Tuesdays. And, you know, I don't think that's set in stone in the policy. I'm not sure we need to, I mean, maybe 72 hours before the board meeting.
Yeah, because we usually.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, we always have changed.
Yeah.
Really good
Yeah,
suggestion.
that's right, exactly,
Yeah.
he's not here or something. Yeah.
Yeah, no
So
less
no
than
less than-
yeah, 72 hours, especially if you have a special meeting.
And I also, in that same paragraph, it says the superintendent will prepare the meeting agenda during the week before the meetings and review it with the board president. I think this policy should, be updated. It's not just with the board president, it's with the executive.
The board executive. committee.
Yeah, the board executive committee that means.
Already says the 72 hours. Where did it, oh, Friday, there it is.
Yeah, I think the 72 hours part is about publicizing the
Yes.
meeting, giving notice.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, that's right.
Talking about the meetings and rules about.
Yes.
So might I suggest that we allot 15 minutes for the public, for the speakers that want to speak and sign out, they can sign out. As long as if there's not up to 15 minutes, say there's an open 3-minute slot, we let somebody speak possibly. That way it clears up some of the issues.
That should be a
That's part of the other policy, the
The
public
public
speaking, public comment policy.
Yeah. But yeah. that's-
Which, I mean, and that's the one that we just adopted, like, what, last meeting or maybe the
Yeah.
meeting before it, it was there.
That's when we spend quite a bit of time, also looking at, yeah.
if we want to put in a.
It's never perfect. That's the issue.
It's not, I mean, it's important to know that, public expression, it doesn't even, you don't even have to have a policy on it. We don't have to have that.
Actually, what about a disclaimer? In the event of a special meeting, the board president shall consider public comment, well, which you can't do anyway, but at least we have a disclaimer
Well,
there.
we've got something like that in the policy.
Yeah, let's not revisit that.
No, we're not gonna
Yeah.
revisit that policy.
Let's stick
we
to
just-
this policy.
The board president has that authority to do so.
And it says that in there, yes,
we're good.
it does.
All right, anything else on the regular meeting policy? All right, we'll look at it again and revisit next time.
Okay.
Next on the agenda is policy number 3421, Title IX and sex discrimination. This is the first reading. This is a new policy.
It's a new policy. It's also a required policy. So back in 2019, school districts were to adopt policies for Title IX. And we have to have a policy on record.
We have a policy on Title IX already. It's incorporated into our current anti-discrimination policies. I don't know how many of you have looked closely at this policy, but it is red. I mean, what it does, it says it's a sex discrimination policy. It is a radical limitation on the kinds of claims of sex discrimination that can be made only against children. That is, it doesn't apply to staff or faculty because they're covered by Title VII, which is employment discrimination, which hasn't changed. What this says is if an adult sexually harasses a child, that our standard for establishing that as a case of harassment and our procedures have to be much more protective to the perpetrator of the harassment than they would if an adult harassed an adult. It is completely absurd, this policy. It is really terrible in many ways. And one thing is it's absolutely inconsistent with other anti-discrimination policies that we have. It means that we have to treat discrimination in this narrow context, which is sexual harassment, differently than we treat religious discrimination, or race discrimination, or discrimination on the basis of a disability, all of which are covered by other policies like DASA. Is completely inconsistent with DASA. We cannot do both. I mean, what this policy is the equivalent of saying, you can't fix your stairs until somebody's fallen and broken their leg and is in a position where they can sue you and request monetary damages. You know, what this says is you don't have a case of sexual harassment until you've reached a standard that would be compensable if you sue. What a ridiculous policy. I mean, what we want is to be able to prevent the school from being the victim of the lawsuit and from having to pay damages because of sexual harassment. We want a policy that allows the school to intervene and take remedial action in a proportionate way as soon as there is instances of sexual harassment. So we stop it from escalating to a point where somebody can bring a lawsuit and recover damages against the school. And this says we can't do that. It defines sexual harassment at the level that would entitle a person to recover damages. It creates procedural hurdles that are ridiculous for a secondary school system. I mean, it creates essentially mini trials where people have the right to call witnesses and present evidence. We don't want kids to be doing that. And it creates such, what it does is it creates a system where those kids with resources or adults with resources can kind of fight back in a way that kids without resources can't. And we don't want a policy that creates the sort of procedural rights that mean that it's almost impossible to apply this policy in an even-handed way across our student body. And one of the things that really irks me about it is that even though it creates all these procedural rights with respect to the actual sexual harassment claims, what it does before, temporarily and logically before you do that, is it requires, mandates, whoever the Title IX coordinator is, to provide supportive services to the victim. And what that means, I mean, I'm not opposed to supportive services, but the implication there is that there's always something wrong with the victim, right? That it's because the victim is the victim of sexual harassment because they are depressed or anxious or confused about their sexuality. It's kind of an implicit blame victim approach. It's like, okay, rather than, maybe there's nothing wrong with the victim except that they're right, that they've been sexually harassed. And the supportive services they need is for somebody to believe them, not to offer them counseling or medication or time off or whatever somebody feels like they need to recover from. The problem is the perpetrator. The problem is not the victim. And this policy, if you read it closely, basically tries to distract. It tries to prevent that next step from happening, that step of taking remedial action against the perpetrator by kind of diverting the victim into quote unquote supportive services. It's a terrible policy and it's inconsistent with our other anti-discrimination policies. And we do have a Title IX anti-discrimination policy on our books. And we have a Title VII anti-discrimination policy, and we have DASA, and we have New York state law. And their sexual harassment policy under New York state law is actually quite strong and much better than this. So let's not adopt this policy. Yeah, and the other thing that bugs me is that last year.
What's that Title IX policy?
It's, I don't know what number it is, it may be 3121, but it's a general anti-discrimination policy and it cites Title IX amongst the sources of, it covers all kinds of discrimination, including gender discrimination.
So the 3420 non-discrimination and anti-harassment in the district does not cover the required parts of this policy that we have to have. So if we want to take perhaps some of the things that we have to have in this policy and expand the other policy, that's okay. But we've been advised that there are portions of this policy that are in here that that we don't have on the books, that we must have on the books.
Well, I think the other thing that really bugs me is this came up a year ago. And I went through this policy paragraph by paragraph, and I responded in writing, and I submitted those comments in writing, and they were supposed to go to our attorney, and we heard nothing, not a single word in response.
Why don't we just table this and wait for the next meeting and get a response from our lawyer?
Well, how about send it to operations?
We're not about to vote on it.
No. This
So
is
this
just
is the first reading.
Exactly.
This is why we're having this discussion.
I think referring it to operations is a great idea.
And I
So we
would
can
really
keep
like
it
to
into
talk
the
to,
pieces.
you know, I mean, I don't know who an expert on this policy would be. I'm not sure whether, you know, Martin is the right person or whether we get somebody from BOCES, but
Actually, NISBA would probably be the
yeah.
people to go to,
But-
because you gotta figure it's a combination of state and or federal
Yeah,
laws
and,
and.
and then there's this issue called preemption in the law, which, and it basically means that you're generally entitled to adopt laws or policies that are more favorable for individuals than are mandated. In other words, the law provides a floor, not a ceiling. Like, you know, you can't pay somebody below minimum wage, but you can pay them above minimum wage. So I believe that we would be legally entitled to adopt a policy that is more generous towards our students who are victims of sexual harassment than this policy is. And, you know, and we would be abiding by the law because, you know, again, you're allowed as a general matter to proper, you know, kind of more generous entitlements to your constituents than the law actually, you know, the minimum mandates. But, you know, this is, I know the history and how these particular regulations got passed, and it's not pretty, and we don't want this policy, not as written.
Okay, operations have.
I appreciate the comments, Janine. I'll have to look at this again with some of those thoughts in mind. My initial take, to be honest, was this is probably our longest policy at 20 pages.
Yeah.
And it seems at 20 pages, there are, in fact, redundancies, and we need to eliminate them. So it does seem like this policy needs a lot of processing, but one that the superintendent says we need. So we have to balance that.
So these policies that it references at the bottom here, are these the only policies that this might be in conjunction with that we have on the books?
Yeah.
Or are there others out there maybe that?
These are the ones. So we have the list of a few, no, they're all these, 34, 20, 61.
Just these three?
21, 75, 50, and our code of conduct.
Yes, the code of conduct.
And then there's also the New York State, a separate New York State law that Janine referenced.
That would be 6121.
The sexual harassment. So that's the issue with these policies are, you know, we're required to have them. You know, so you're like,
well,
what do we do? You know,
We're required
I mean,
to have a policy.
we're required to have a policy.
There are some required components of the policy as well, though. And, you know, not commenting to everything that you have brought up thus far, but we can get those portions that have to be in our policy, those required things, and make sure that the policy, whether it's 5 pages, 20 pages, will end up having all of those components in it. I just want to make sure we're in compliance and that we're not out of compliance by not having the portions. A reference to Title IX is not the same as a Title IX policy. So I'll make sure that we have all the proper components of our policy in it. And we'll get, whether it's one of the district's attorneys using someone from the training, there was some very quality training over at CA BOCES.
Yeah.
And it could be the person who helped to put that training together, who might even be available at our operations meeting to meet with us for it, or to, at the very least, if you had a copy of what you had provided previously.
Yeah.
I don't have a copy of it in my office. It wasn't there. I apologize, but it was never there.
Yeah, I will, I'm sure I have it somewhere on my computer. I'll put it.
I think
Do that would
you
help.
spent a great deal of time on it. That's part of the reason why we didn't have it. We had not adopted it yet because, you know.
We were kind of quote unquote waiting with your back.
We were,
Whatever, a year ago.
yeah.
You know, I find it difficult to believe that NISBA, the Commissioner of Education, or the state hasn't provided us with a better platform for this. So you don't have 700 districts with 700 policies that some may have merit, others may not. I mean, there's got to be consistency among all districts.
Well,
That's what this is.
Most have done.
I mean, what happened is that during the Trump administration, there was rulemaking under Title IX because there was a perception that young men in colleges were being expelled because they did not have adequate procedural rights when they were accused of sexual misconduct. And that if you were expelled from college for sexual misconduct, it was very difficult to get into any other college. So there was a particular problem that Title IX's been on the books for 50 years. This isn't the beginning of Title IX. This is very recent rulemaking responding to a particular problem in tertiary education, and it should never have been applied to secondary education. And it just doesn't fit for high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. And because Title IX is about students. And students in secondary schools are children, and different rules apply to children than adults. And we should be more protective of children than we are of young adults. And I mean, although I understand the context in which these rules were made, whoever made the decision to apply them downhill made a huge mistake. And we need to figure out a way to modify it so that it fits, so that we are adequately protecting our students and not simply responding to what was a particular political problem that resulted in a particular political solution. And it's a square hole in a round peg.
So that goes to my point where we're going to have 700 different policies with 700 different districts, when we should have one that covers everything. Unfortunately, we don't have that.
We do have that, so
Well,
3121.
I mean, that has to go more in depth.
Well, yeah, or more in depth. I mean, that I agree with you entirely, Jim. We should have a consistent approach. Remember, many people who are experiencing discrimination aren't going to just be experiencing gender discrimination, right? You can be, if somebody is teased for wearing a hijab, how do you know whether it's religious discrimination or gender discrimination? And if we have different ways of approaching those two different topics, I don't know how you implement a policy like that. It's ridiculous.
Good talking point.
And part of that too, though, just for everyone else's understanding is we do have individuals who have undergone some very good training. And when a situation is brought to their attention, then they have the knowledge of how this needs to be dealt with and in what direction it will go. Also notice that under this policy, it does refer to some of the other ways of one making a comment or a complaint and how that's handled. And it also discusses in here the differences between, let's say, it doesn't, by going through this, it doesn't preclude someone's ability to utilize some of those other avenues of complaint, such as through our district's code of conduct.
Well, I think referring it to operations for more consideration.
I would most definitely appreciate that. And I would definitely like more education.
The other
Honestly,
thing,
somebody who can really explain this to me, along with Janine.
well, and I would like to know, we just exactly what you just said, Dr. Gillen, somebody has to implement this. And,
Right.
I know Aaron or if there's somebody who says, how are they gonna do it? I'd like to hear that.
Yeah.
Like.
I'd like to also
yeah.
refer everyone to our website because the training is posted on the website. And that's there for everyone to look at, to see exactly what the training has to do with. It also gives some more of the background. And you might find it helpful just looking over that. I need to make sure everyone was aware that it is on our website.
Well, there is
So
one other detail. Since we have a convention coming up sometime in next October, this might be something that NISBA might want to grasp because they have their own lawyers and they may want to work on this particular verbology, if you will.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, we're supposed to extend out to that, but there's no sense in having our lawyers go through this and having 699 other lawyers go through that when that's what we pay NISBA to do.
So this is great to know. I didn't even know where to go to get this, that information would be great, for somebody to let me know about. The other thing is, we've had situations and even our employees don't know where to go. They don't know what they're supposed to do. So, it's great to have a policy, whatever we've got, but it'd be nice to know we've got information out there. I didn't know it was out there. I know I probably have time in my day. I probably could have got around on that and looked for it, but it'd be nice to know that, in all honesty.
that's why I brought it up.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome.
So if we're gonna refer this to operations, can you send us a list of the exact things that have to be required?
We'll get those portions that have to be there. If we can get some backup from our policy services, which is put together by attorneys as well. And we do pay for this policy service. It's the policy service that most school districts do use. But since we also belong to NISBA, the New York State School Boards Association, we'll also reach out to them for their recommendations and what they found in the policy. Absolutely. So we'll have something to work from. And hopefully by then we'll also have Janine's comments that'll help tremendously in that, of going through what needs to be there, what doesn't need to be there, and just making sure, I think everyone agrees at the bottom line that we want to make sure we're in compliance. And, but we want to make sure that it's a reasonable policy that makes sense and that will safeguard those that we need to, right?
I look forward to that seminar in October.
If it would be possible, I mean, that being that it's a 20-page policy and it sounds like there's multiple other policies and things that need to be read along with it, plus the comments that you had made on it, we can get that all like more than a couple of days in advance of that meeting. I would really appreciate it.
Do you mind if I send my comments to everyone at the same time? Is that okay with you?
Please send it to the entire board, because that way comments, not just everyone who's on operations.
No, I'll send it to everyone.
If I had more than like a weekend to read through it, that would really be appreciated.
If you go to the civil rights portion of the human resources website or of our website, on the side, there are all of the policies regarding civil rights in the district.
Are we anticipating talking about this at the operations committee meeting on the 25th? That seems like a rather short window.
It's a short window, but we can start our conversation. I don't want to drop it. I worry about what happened last time and it got dropped and then forgotten. We have to keep some life in it, even if we just talk about what we've done thus far and what we need to do next. So it'll be on the agenda. We'll at least do that. Okay, if that's okay.
Okay. All right, that's a good, healthy conversation for that one. Next up is our DEI inclusion policy. The first reading is policy 3430. Discussion on that.
Yeah, just one thing that comes to mind as soon as I bring it up here. Covers pretty much everything we talked about. I'm sure there's some tweaking in there, but special trainings may be provided to a member of the DEI committee. How about training sessions may be provided? Special meeting is what? It's like a.
What page are you on?
I'm not, it's at the bottom of the policy. Under training. I don't know what special meetings, but they're training sessions, is what they actually are.
Special trainings may be provided. They might not necessarily be sessions. Sometimes it's something that's a link or, you know, not a session that everyone does all at once, but it could be something that's provided in as a PDF of a presentation someone else did. I think that's why it just said special trainings. Some of those trainings might occur at the meetings, but it's a recognition that those who are on the committee might need additional training that maybe not everyone would have, just to help do the work of the committee.
I mean, if that term is acceptable, that's fine. I look at it.
I see what you mean.
Kind of doesn't really cover it, but it's a disclaimer regardless, so for the most part.
So one of the points of this committee on the brain of this policy is to have those definitions. We have talked many times about DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has the definitions in it, but it also talks about the committee itself and the fact that we also have to have a coordinator, or at least that someone is paying attention to. So for that, starting out as being your superintendent or designee, it's rather than putting it on the shoulders of just one person right now, it's something that responsibility will be for that superintendent, and that might change over time, depending on staffing and job descriptions, but that someone will take care of these components that are highlighted in so far in this policy. To make sure that culturally responsive sustaining education framework that we've adopted as being our framework is identified. And that those components under teaching and learning, the family and community engagement, the workforce diversity, the learning opportunities, and also for student supports and the connection to wellness being highlighted in this policy as well, besides, as we mentioned, the training.
Yeah, overall, I thought it was a really well written
Pretty
policy,
in-depth.
and I don't know if there's more that needs to be included, but I feel like, again, these policies are meant to be looked at and changed, you know, we're not gonna live with this for the next however many years, so it's a good start on something that I liked it, you know, I like the definitions, I like, you know, that it looked pretty good to me.
And a lot of it is how do we.
Yeah, and again, and how is it implemented?
Yeah. I heard some commentator describe this kind of cultural inclusion as your education being both a window and a mirror, and I really like that. You know, so it's a window where you learn to how other people have experienced history and culture, and then, but part of your education should also be a mirror, so you should be able to see some of your own personal history and culture and family values reflected in your education. I don't know, that stuck with me.
So I'm not hearing a lot of changes that people are interested in for this policy.
I'm sure there may be, but I mean, it's pretty solid right now.
So we want to.
I think we want to, it's time to adopt this policy. All right, you know, just to be sure.
Give it one more, once over.
You know, I didn't see anything that I objected to.
So who needs to be sure? Where do you, I'm just asking. Like all of us?
Well, all of us, yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay.
That's,
All right.
that's fine. I was just throwing it out there.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
And that is a new policy as well. All right.
This is, I don't know if this is an appropriate comment about this, but because not all of our community is going to agree with this policy, I'm not sure that everyone is aware, at least in the high school, that we have essentially gone to gender neutral restrooms anyway. They are all cabinets.
You're talking about the next.
Are you on the next policy now?
Right. Oh, yes, yes.
I had
Okay.
to move on from this one, but yeah.
All right, we're going to
I'm just trying to figure out where that was fitting
All
into the DEI.
So the DEI policy, we're gonna take
Yeah,
another,
we're gonna give that another
run
run through, double check,
But so
triple
far,
check,
that
and
looks pretty good.
Sure.
investigate it. Got it. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Perfect.
So now we'll move on
Okay, over
to
Thank you.
policy 7552, gender identity.
Okay, now Paul.
Oh, what I just said.
So you're referring to policy 5633, gender neutral single occupancy bathrooms that we have. It's listed at the end of the policy.
For the record, we do have those bathrooms currently, and when we did our last capital project, I believe, and probably some one before that, we created new bathrooms. Our stalls in our bathrooms go top to bottom, so you have complete privacy. And Jenny, I believe you were stating before that we're working on dressing rooms or areas.
Any new changing spaces that are altered are required, you're required to have a gender neutral changing station.
Right, so we, out of all that, we considered this years ago, so we're actually updating our capital projects as to, so it conforms with today's specifications and,
Yeah, we were ahead. I mean, I know when I came on the board, you guys were already moving on it, so.
we did quite a bit
Ahead
of
of
projects.
the curve on that, yeah.
That's,
We started this discussion, really, the superintendent before last.
Yeah, 2 superintendents ago, yes. Yep.
so everybody that's here now that has questions or concerns, This has been ongoing, so you need to show up at some committee meetings. We'll be more than happy to explain everything.
My biggest issue with this policy are two words, which is as appropriate. And what the as appropriate falls into the paragraph on when the school includes parents in the conversation about what gender identity the child is going to use at school. And what it does is it gives essentially unfettered discretion for the school to determine whether to include parents in that conversation, regardless of how young the child is. The child could be 8 or 10, and express an interest to a school counselor who might have seen that child for a 20-minute, half an hour interview, and not include the parents in a conversation about whether or not that child is going to be gender nonconforming or take on a different gender than their birth gender. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't respect children who feel that and want to, be transgender or be gender nonconforming, but I just feel very, very strongly that if gender is a really significant part of your identity, it is not something that we do without bringing families into the conversation and into the decisions. I mean, would we baptize a child at school and not tell their parents? Would we give them a tattoo and not tell their parents? How can we decide that we're going to allow a child to be consistently a different gender at school and leave the parents out of the conversation? That just seems, I mean.
Sometimes it's hard for kids to talk to their parents about this stuff.
Well, maybe there is a very limited exception that we carve out if for an older child who feels like they would be, I don't know, in danger of physical violence or eviction from their home if their parents knew of this, but.
No, it's not about that. It's a tough subject for kids to talk about with their parents.
Well, so is religion, so is sex, so are a lot of things. That doesn't mean that you don't talk to your parents about that or that the school doesn't. This is my feeling. Listen, the people in the world who know and care most about individual children are their parents. People are more about their children than anybody else. I mean, and if you've been a parent, there is something real about the parental bond. There is something real about that. It is, you feel differently about your own children and more invested in them and more concerned about them than you do for other people's children. I'm sorry, but that's the way the world is. And a good school respects that bond, and parents have to trust that we respect that bond. And so you don't do things without parents knowing what we're doing when it's that significant. Again, maybe there's a narrow carve out where we're really talking about physical danger to a child, but we can't, we can't pit the school against families. That doesn't matter.
My question would be then is, how do we make that narrow carve out? Because there are kids that are going to be in danger of losing their homes.
Well, I think that is something for further conversation. That's what I think we really need to decide. And I would say, maybe a child over 16 and who really makes a convincing case that if their parents learn about their gender identity, that
I would argue there's kids that are younger than that.
I would agree that they might know, but I think that one thing we have to keep in mind, is that teenage kids often underestimate how much their parents care about them, right? So their sense of what will happen at home and the reality of what will happen at home are often not exactly consistent. And I'm not sure we should always only be taking the child's word for it. And that, it is a huge problem, and I agree, maybe we need some more conversation about exactly what those boundaries are, and I'm not sure if this board is particularly capable of making it. I would like to hear from other experts in thinking about how we draw that. But the idea that there's unfettered discretion, and at any age, regardless of what the home circumstances are, it's just up to a counselor or a teacher. Okay, we're gonna let this person, you know, this child, because they're expressing the desire to be a different gender
I'm
at school.
afraid, Janine, though, that you would find your experts are going to side with this part of the policy. I'm sorry, whether or not I agree with you or disagree, I'm not saying either way. But no, I'm telling you that, you know, and as an educator myself, it's very challenging. It's incredibly challenging. We've already, in our district here, have changed things that we've done to protect these students, you know, as far as names and programs and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, you get to the point, even like, for example, in yearbooks, you know, like what name are we, you know, do we put in? I mean, what's the policy? Where do we go with this? You know, I mean, so, I mean, it's huge. It's a huge thing, but I will tell you that in any trainings that I have attended, and I'd like to attend a whole lot more, let me just be honest. But I mean, this is really, in all honesty, this is where it's at. But I'm just telling you,
but it may not be right.
It may not be. It may not be. I agree with you. It may not be. That seems to be where they're leading us. I mean, that's where I've been.
Well, that's not gonna be set in stone at any given time, because there's always gonna be the challenges, the future challenges for that. And as far as the kids go, I mean, it depends on their age, their mental state, acute and chronic situations that do arrive, we have to accept those challenges, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. But that piece of paper, that's just a stepping stone for more change.
But no, it's not. It's our policy. And, you know, and I'm not saying, again, I don't want to come across as being you know, bigoted or opposed to the.
No, I don't think any of us are. I mean, that's not, you know.
What I want to do is I want to partner with the community when I mean, are you really serious? Does anybody in this room really believe that the New York Department of Education knows everything there is to know about gender identity? I mean, they're just coming out
So
with stuff
Janine, what
too,
you're
right?
pointing out is something that's very important, is if we look at the back page of page 3, where it highlights all of the laws and codes that this policy is based upon, then what you're highlighting is exactly, I mean, these are difficult and challenging things to work through.
Yes, they are.
However, a lot of these decisions are not decisions for us to make, and they've already been made for the board, for the community, for everyone.
But actually, that's not.
Well,
I did read the law.
I
did
understand
read the
that.
law, and there is a
Can I,
component of
may I
this.
please finish though, in terms of what I'm talking about? Because we have, it's not just one source that we've gotten this from, it's from all kinds of sources. So let me finish this. In terms of how we take care of our records,
Right.
that has been, and that's partly part of this policy. I don't want to focus just in on one part of it and throw away an entire policy. That whether we have this policy or not, I just want to make it clear that there are things in this policy that we will do because we have to do. And I want to make sure everyone understands that as far as records, first of all, we've been doing a lot of this. Looking at the specific needs of each student on a case-by-case basis. I'm here to say that our faculty and staff do that day in, day out. When it says over here that the district will maintain the confidentiality of student information and records as required by law, we do. Further, the separate confidential file, we have to do that. It is not up for us to figure out whether or not we're going to do it. The names and pronouns, we have gotten a lot of guidance that we must follow this whether we have it in here or not. Now, when we talk about restrooms and locker rooms, we've discussed that already and we have a policy, which is why this is also referring to that policy. With physical education and sports, that's also dictated by the New York State sports and physical health, oh, help me, that association and their guidelines as well, NISPA.
Yes.
Thank
New York
you.
State Public.
And yes, and also the dress code and team uniforms, that the district will not restrict students' clothing or appearance based on the basis of gender. That's something that we will do either way. I don't think the purpose of the policy is by any way, shape, or form to negate or get in the way of a parent's relationship with a student, with the child at all. That's not the school district's intention. In fact, I can tell you that our staff works as hard as we can with families and with the student to do what's in the best interest of that child on a case-by-case basis. In each and every case, whether the child is young or the student is 18, those conversations are always different. They're always delicate, but they're always handled with the care of a caring professional in the district. That we host those conversations, we try to do what's best for that student. No one is forced in any way, one way or the other, and it's not taken very lightly. So I know as we're talking about this challenging policy, I think it's important to remember those points.
I did read the part of it. I mean, it is true that there is a component of this policy that is reflects a new law, which is the record keeping. And that's actually, in my opinion, the non-controversial part of the policy. But the rest of it is based on guidelines. And it says that in the introductory materials that you gave to us. And I understand they're guidelines, but we've seen in the last 2 years that the people who are issuing some of these guidelines are not omniscient, and they're not far more intelligent than us, right? We sometimes, at the point of being on the board and the point of a certain degree of local control, is to click our brains into the on position and ask what is best for our community. And we can take those guidelines into consideration, but we don't have to follow them lock, stock, and barrel when that is not best for our local community. And I can tell you as a parent, if I learned that the school was having my child kind of be a different gender than I thought my child was at home, and I didn't know about it, I would be shocked. And it's not because I don't love my child. I would just want to know. I would want to know if they were experiencing some kind of gender dysphoria. My God, I would want to know. And the idea that the school would not tell me would feel like a huge betrayal. A huge betrayal of the child. I'm not saying that people don't exercise their judgment. I'm saying the point of this policy is to guide judgment and is to say, what do we as a board think the presumption should be? And I think the very, very, very strong presumption is a parent should be in the room when you're having that conversation with the child about what gender they're going to be.
Yes, yes.
And so that's not very, very, very good reason why they're not. And it can't be just up to a counselor, and it can't be just up to a teacher. I'm sorry. Parents have rights too.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think one of, if we can maintain order just for our discussions here, and this is a first reading. What are those recommendations that of changing in here, and what wording can we use for our policy? Right, so that's part of what we're talking about here. So do we have any recommendations on portions to be changed or wording to be added and or subtracted from the policy for our first reading?
So my question is similar to the policy we looked at before.
Mhm.
What of this policy, if anything, is actually required of us?
Yeah.
The records part.
Is that the only part?
No, it's not the only part. There was,
The rest I believe.
from Harris Beach that came out recently with those recommendations on what needs to be in it. I can share that again. Right, but it's also from a civil rights standpoint.
I mean, I don't really honestly take a whole lot of issue with this policy, although I do agree that to the extent possible, parents should be there. Because if my child was identifying differently at home than they were at school, I would just want to know, because I'd want to be able to support whatever is going on. And maybe my kid, for whatever reason, didn't feel comfortable talking about it with me. And I should know so that I could be part of the conversation. But I mean, otherwise, I really would like to know what is required and what isn't, what is up to us, because that, I mean, I don't hate the policy. I just would like to know what is our leeway with it.
So my suggestion is that we gather that information, bump it back down to operations and try to hash that out.
And in the meantime, if anyone has any specific language to be added and or subtracted, I think that's helpful for our committee as we look at the policy as well.
It's not just Janine's responsibility, it's all of
Well,
it.
to everybody,
And
yeah,
I
not
would
for
like to,
everyone.
I would really, Mary said she's had trainings, I'm sure other people in the district have had trainings. I mean, I don't feel like I'm an expert on this.
I need more training.
But I would sure like to know why. It boggles my mind. I mean, again, can you imagine that we would create a policy that said a kid could go to their high school counselor and say, I'd really like a tattoo? And the counselor would say, well, if you really want one, we don't have to tell your mom and dad, we'll just get you a tattoo. I mean, we would never do that. And yet it seems to me that gender identity is far more significant than getting a tattoo.
Well, I believe the state in fact makes you have parental requirement under the age of 18, not school requirement for a tattoo.
It does call into question what the expectations are, what our responsibilities are as educators. I mean, where does the information that's shared with me, like, where do I go with that information or whatever, you know what I mean? So we're looking at all of it, it's.
Anyhow, I mean, if there is somebody with some expertise on how children experience this, I'd be all for hearing it, but, boy, I think that we just have to create an environment in this district where parents feel empowered and they feel like education only works when it doesn't stop at the classroom door. It only works when it is a community endeavor and when the school is embedded in a community that supports it and a community that trusts that what happens in the school is something that they think is going to be a positive and transformative experience for their child. This is a really critical role that we play. And I think to start to drive wedges into that it's just, if we don't have to, let's not do it. And, let's figure out ways that we can be supportive of all of our students and inclusive and protect diversity, but not alienate a whole bunch of families.
Well, there's a few things that Kelly probably hit one thing on the head. Under the age of 18, where does that responsibility fall? And when we're talking about the Commissioner of Education, our legislature, and any of the lawsuits coming out, what are they're gonna transform this as well in the next few years. I mean, obviously, there's gonna be debate, there's gonna be changes, there's gonna be more changes. And right now, we're looking at, what can we do at the local level? I mean, we have to have our own philosophy and we have to have discretion. And I mean, you can't put everything in a set policy and just say we're gonna have it set in stone. There's gotta be some wiggle room and we have to use discretion and let our people that are in an administrative role do their jobs. And if somebody drops the ball, then we need to implement said changes.
And our legal advice, the people that get paid to help us make these decisions.
That's our point of reference too as well, because they're updated on lawsuits and changes.
Well, I mean, I can try to bring some language to the operations committee. I mean, I think again, it's in some ways it's taking that word as appropriate and creating some presumptions that can be overcome in limited situations. But for the most part, I think that this decision about what gender identity a child is going to take consistently at school should be made by family and not by a child by themselves or a child with a school counselor or other professional. No matter how well intentioned, they just can't know that child as well as their parents.
Can I ask, do we have any other policies on the records that allow students to go to the school? I mean, not regarding gender, maybe regarding some form of a health related issue or a sex related issue, something where they might talk to somebody here at the school and that would not be reported back to the parents?
Yes.
And do we do have other policies similar that, because I guess that as a parent, I mean, those are things that I would feel like I should be part of those conversations if there's something health related that I should know about. I mean, and again, if they're under the age of 18, how, you know, I mean, it's not just gender or what bathroom they're using at the school. How much is the school not telling parents?
I wouldn't want anyone to walk away from this conversation and thinking that the school is working against parents. Or that the school is working against kids, right? So there are conversations that are had with counselors, school psychologists, with staff members, and with nurses as well, true. But every effort is made to make that connection with home and to encourage that relationship at home as well. It's not as if we're working in isolation.
I mean, we have our students' best interests at heart, we truly do. So, I mean, that's why we spend the time that we do discussing what we do. So, but Janine, I do appreciate your comments and your ideas. It's a wealth of information that we certainly appreciate very much. So, I mean,
And I do think that some of those medical carve-outs are only for older students, like, I really don't, I think that for elementary age kids, you know, I mean, children can't make medical decisions for themselves. So, there are some defined limits about what things, medical information can be relayed to the school and not communicated to a parent. There are parameters. And that's what I think that we need here. We need clear parameters there. And age is a factor, without question, age is a factor. But, you know.
Well, there's that fine line too between parental rights and student rights. And we're not a jury here. It's not a trial. This is, how do we determine that? And like I said, it usually comes out of lawsuits, legislation. And like I said, you can't have 700 different policies for 700 different school districts. I mean, there's got to be something viable that could. This is probably the best generic thing we can come up with. It does address a lot of what we can address, and it's going to be these changes. When you're talking about gender identity, there's going to be ongoing changes and ongoing lawsuits, and we're just going to have to change it as needed.
I just want to make a comment about the parent notification. And this goes to other health issues too. I would bet dollars to donuts that everyone in this room wants to know what's going on with their kids, whether it's their gender identity, their health issues, their, you know, we're there for their little league games. You know, we want to participate in all of it. We go to the teacher conferences, you know, we're there and we all want to do it. And I bet everybody in this room is too. But I also know that there's kids in the community who are not getting any support at home, even at the little kids level, you know, and if they have an issue with a health issue, one of the things that we have as a support is CPS. If we notify parents that the kid's got a health issue and the parents don't do anything, then it's an obligation to be another authority, to bring in another authority. So I'm not saying that I disagree with Janine's points. I mean, I want to know, and I want to be supportive of my kids and all that. But
we represent.
But we have
a lot
to,
of
we have to think of
students and children
everything.
here. That's exactly right. You know, we know those students that have that family support. They've got that. Not every child does.
So there needs to be the carve out.
I mean,
at some point.
So, I mean, I think that in some sense, we're moving in a direction and it's just a matter of where that balance is, and I think that the balance is not really very well expressed in this policy. But I think we also have to be very careful as a school and as a board, not, I think we tend to have, one of our forms of insidious discrimination around here is the good family, bad family distinction. And, the kids get located in one of those two groups the moment they walk into the doors of the school. And I think that we need to, presume that all parents, yeah, sure, we have CPS if they're really in a situation of abuse and neglect. But, even the parents that don't come to school conferences, even the parents who don't have a primary care physician for their child, love their children. And we have to be aware that all parents, we need to make an effort as a district to reach all parents and to involve all parents in the care of their children, and to presume at the outset, until there's very strong evidence otherwise, that the same care and love that we have for our kids is true of everybody out there. And for the most part, it is.
So as a first reading, you send it back and see if there's any other terminology. If not, I can accept it as it is, because there's going to be constant changes in the future regardless. So, unless operations want to get involved in terminology, and that requires more legal expertise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So I think we've got some guidance on things that we need to look into.
Good luck with that.
Thank you for it.
Push down into operations.
We'll get that one too.
All right. So next we have informational items. There's a board election coming up. I don't know if anybody's heard. But nominating petitions are still available, but they are due shortly, I believe. April 27th, right there on the information. From tomorrow. Board meetings and committee meetings are listed. Everybody take a quick look at that. See if there's anything that looks off.
We do have a building and grounds meeting next week.
Don't we have an operations meeting on Monday, the 25th?
That was on the previous agenda.
Oh, this is May, this is May,
okay.
sorry, yeah.
I'm sorry.
We do that, yes.
Okay.
We could start putting those dates if they haven't occurred yet.
So,
All right.
so there is an operations committee meeting on
Monday
There
at
is.
4:30.
Yes.
and so, and then we also have our special board meeting at 6:30.
Yep.
Okay,
And building
So
and
that
grounds
means you gotta
too.
It's okay, it'll last 6.
We gotta keep operations under 2 hours.
okay. We'll do,
Good luck.
and Grounds Tuesday.
yeah, Tuesday, yeah.
Are they in the same location at least?
So,
They are.
Can we
yeah,
order pizza?
Yeah.
our bad.
We have a TAS meeting tomorrow?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, we do.
As long as we're getting all.
I'll
our-
send you one. The agenda is just based on coming up with the name of what we discussed what the agenda was last time, coming up with the name, and then everybody was going to come with their ideas that they had for
Recognition.
recognition.
Beautiful.
So,
All right.
Executive session?
We do have a need for executive session. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Can you say what it's for?
Or.
For
For the purpose of pending or current litigation. And that if there isn't.
And what? Just one thing?
Is it on the next page?
Number 6.
Number 6. Medical, financial credit, or employment history of a particular person.
And are we inviting anybody in? Okay. So I had a motion from Jim.
Second.
Thank you, Mary. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thanks for showing up, everybody.
8:49 it is. Where are we going for?
Right here.
Right here? Just clear the room.
I think we can stay in here.
We're not gonna have.
We do have a separate link though, Ira, do you have the link? Okay, excellent.
We have no action after this, correct? There will be no action.
You also-
Another.